So, welcome to Passive Mom, a podcast by 3 Vietnamese college students trying to navigate adulthood through both the scope of their Vietnamese and American cultures. We are just here to chat and share our lives with you. My name is Jasmine. I almost forgot my name for a second there. And this week, I am taking care of myself to the best of my abilities in order to avoid burnout.
That's really good. My name is Cindy, and this week I'm not doing what Jasmine's doing. I'm very stressed out, and I want to drop out of school. Thank you.
My name is Z. You guys can call me Kevin, and I agree with Sydney fully.
I'm ready to leave.
Let's go. Let's get out of here.
I'm still going. I got this. Y'all got this too. You can do it.
Oh.
Final stretch. Finals week is like literally next week.
Final stretch
2 weeks.
for you guys. Anyways, yes, you can do this. I believe in you. But anyways, welcome back everyone. This week we're touching on kind of a heavy topic, privileges. So while we are doing this podcast for fun, it's also important for us to talk about important issues. As young adults, it's also important for us to be aware of what we do and do not have, just be aware of our situation in general in comparison to others. So, again, privilege. However, I do need to acknowledge that all of us come from pretty similar backgrounds, so by no means do we intend to speak on the behalf of any other community, or any other just group of people, but I suppose community and group of people I would say. But in this sense, we are not exactly the most diverse group of people to talk about privilege, so this episode is more for conversation rather than education. But anyways, let's get on to the episode. We hope you enjoy it and learn a little bit more about us and yourselves. So, first off, I kind of want to hear you guys' definitions of privilege.
Yeah, I can start off. Essentially, when I think about privilege, I think about, like, aspects of yourself that probably has, or might have advantages over someone else, either from a different community or group, as constructed by society. And those advantages can really be intentional or unintentional to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's a really good definition. Mine, like, kind of adds on to that a little bit. I would say that privilege would be access to resources that not everyone is able to attain. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone with a privilege is lucky or anything and that they are able to be held to a higher standard because of their privileges, but it's more so that those who do not have the same privileges, it's because they are not given access to the resources that they require, like higher education and access to transportation and work opportunities.
Yeah, and basically for me, I guess it's essentially like being able, kind of thing, you know. And so I definitely agree with Jasmine, like what you said, like being able to have access to all these resources, but it also is like, well, you yourself having the ability to do certain things as well, you know. It's not just material wise, but also ability wise. So like some person can be able to do this, but somebody can't, you know. So, and then also it's not necessarily like somebody's more lucky than somebody, but it's more like just being, I guess, able. So
Yeah.
And I like all of our definitions. Obviously there's probably more that we could touch on, but like I'm kind of curious to know like how you guys have learned about privileges. Like what ways have you become aware of your own privileges, or just aware of the idea of privileges in general? Because I know for me, like, I learned a lot through my classes. I'm a social sciences major, so I go over this a lot, not only in my classes, but I have a big community of students that I also talk about it with as well. So I'm curious for you guys too.
I feel like this idea of privilege has kind of been something that's been building up over the years for as long as I can remember. Like, it can go all the way back to when I was a toddler and trying to make friends, right? You usually make friends through common interests, and then if you don't have enough common interests, then you don't come out as being friends, right? But you do kind of keep track of the differences, and I guess those differences can get deeper as you grow older, or you kind of are more selective of your friend groups. But overall, as we grow older, we get to know people a lot in different perspectives. You know what I mean? So then you start to think, why do I have these differences from another person? And you start to think deeper, like, well, they have these certain experiences that I don't. And then, yeah, I think it just, especially in high school and college, that certainly grows into social justice and stuff. So yeah, I think it just builds up like an avalanche.
I think the awareness of privilege definitely evolves as you're growing up, you know, because like when you're younger, you don't really know exactly what the word privilege is. It's more of like you notice the differences and similarities between you and other people around you. Like, so let's say somebody has something like it's really fancy, whereas you have something that's not as fancy, you know, or something like you have where somebody else doesn't. You notice these similarities, and then as you grow and you start to learn and educate yourself more about, let's say, like privilege, then you start to have a definition, I think, of what you are experiencing, right? So, yeah.
I really appreciate all of that. I think it was pretty helpful for our listeners, if anyone's listening, to kind of gain a sense of our backgrounds for how we view privilege. Hello. Short break here. We had to take a pause in our recording, so we have different clothes on, different lighting, and different energy. So, anyways, moving on from that. Now that we've talked a little bit about how we see privilege, I want to hear about what you both see as your personal privileges.
There are definitely some surface level privileges that I recognize that we all have, like access to food and a roof over our heads, but today we want to dive in deeper into the privileges we don't often think about or take advantage of. And we're going to start off with some similarities, I guess. I just want to start off with that we're all Asian American, Vietnamese American, first generation. And we're also documented citizens following that. So, yeah.
Yeah, touching on like the Asian American student, like first gen, it can definitely go both ways. Obviously, there are hardships that we go through with being first gen, and obviously there are plenty of struggles that come with being Asian American. But I think we often, or at least the Asian community, can often forget about our own privileges as being perceived in a certain way. Often coming from a local minority that we've talked about on our episode before. And while obviously it is not a good way to be perceived as such, we do reap the benefits of it, and sometimes unconsciously or unintentionally. So it's like always something that I have to point out to my friends sometimes, at least. And then also, like, we have a lot of benefits as documented citizens, because we've all been born here. My parents have citizenship. They're not a green card or anything anymore. They've had it for a while. And at least I work with a group of students at my college right now who work to to promote the voices of detained immigrants who don't have papers and who are detained because of that, and listening to the stories about these families that have to go through getting papers or having to navigate what it's like having a family member who's detained. It makes me think about my citizenship status a lot, and how not only am I grateful for the stance that my parents, like for what my parents have gotten while here, but also makes me very frustrated that not everyone has access to those resources, whether it be lawyers or education or just this time to study for citizenship. And yeah, like that kind of comes from like, you know, kid of immigrants and first gen Asian Americans.
It's also such like the process itself is such a controversy, I feel like for example, the citizen knowledge exam that you have to do, one of the steps to become a citizen is it's mostly a bunch of American history, right, which is not even something that a lot of citizens who are born here that know of. But yeah, it's definitely an unfair process that people have to fight for.
For sure, it's like I definitely think that being like a documented citizen has like, we don't really think about it as often because, well, we were born here and then we're like, oh, we move on with our lives. So, but there's a lot of other people who, like we said, don't have that privilege of being a documented citizen. And like, I know some families who had to get their citizenship, and they were taking the test for like months, maybe like years, just to get that credential down in order to become documented citizens. And it's like, it just goes to show how kind of frustrating it can be. Not only that, but it's also like Cindy said, it was unfair because it's like I've seen videos of people trying to take the documented citizen test, like documented citizens taking the citizenship test, and then even they fail on it, and it's like, huh?
Yeah.
Right? It's really frustrating to see that, how it's really unfair sometimes.
And it's unfortunately really easy to turn a blind eye to it because like their presence is so suppressed, and it's not a lot of people even want to talk about it because they think it's like embarrassing or something.
Mm-hmm.
That they don't want to seem vulnerable, but it's such an important topic to know about and to advocate for, which is why I really like what you're doing, Jasmine.
It's also going to be dangerous for them to out themselves as
The safety measure, sure.
Yeah, not only like social persecution, because there are plenty of undocumented students that we take classes with and we would never know.
Mm-hmm.
But also just like people in general. Some people just don't like undocumented citizens, or there's the risk of being sent to detention centers or back home. Or there are people who are stuck in abusive relationships for the sake of their citizenship and for the sake of their children's citizenship. So, yeah, there's a lot of dangers that become with being undocumented. But yeah, moving on a little bit, what else, Cindy?
Well, Jasmine, you mentioned school, so maybe we should touch on education. We all went to K-12 education, I believe.
In preschool. I went to preschool
Oh,
too.
I went to preschool as well. Sweet, did you go to preschool?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, we all had the opportunity to go to school in our lives, and we all now attend universities. You both attend University of Washington, great school, and I attend actually a private school, Seattle University. And there's a lot of great privilege, like just even starting out with K to 12 education, you know.
Yeah, I was talking to some classmates the other day, some of my friends from the LSJ department at UW, and we like passed by a poster like in one of the dorm halls that like listed like some of the privileges that we don't often think of, which is kind of what inspired my suggestion for this episode. But one of the ones that my friend pointed out was education privilege, because often people, especially students, especially liberal college students, or just college students in general, I'm not going to put a label on it, but like, especially college students, they focus so much on what they don't have, and you kind of train too from the start of when you apply to college. You're like, oh, what makes you unique? What have you struggled with in life? And college students especially tend to focus so much on their struggles, whether it's socially, like socioeconomically, that they forget that like if they're at a university, they get the privilege of receiving an education from very knowledgeable instructors and professors. They have the resources that come with being a student. They have the credibility that comes with being a student. And like, yes, while you can be BIPOC in college, there's also the economic factor, because some people just, even financially, cannot afford to go to university. Some people have never received the support from their families to go to university. There are a lot of first-gen students especially who don't know how to do paperwork, to afford finances and applications and scholarships. And so, my friend had mentioned this. I agree that like people forget about education privilege, especially in college, and it can be really humbling thinking about it, because while we're suffering with however many credits we're taking, with work, with life and school and family, and going to sleep at 6 a.m. and waking up at 9 or whatever, it's a privilege that we often take for granted.
Yeah, and I also want to stem off of that, like, even the people who make it to college, there isn't even that great of a percentage, I feel like, especially in the minorities, because to get into college, or especially like a university, you'll need a high school diploma or GED at
the minimum,
as one of the standards. But I actually did a little bit of a research project last quarter about the percentages based on different minority populations that actually get to attend kindergarten or K-12 education in the first place. And you could even call those the controls, but while the white population was at the highest range, I believe next below was the Asian Pacific Islander population. There was the Hispanic population a little bit lower, and then the Black/African American population. So those were kind of like the statistics that were brought forward of children who attend kindergarten, and those statistics just diminish below once you reach high school / if they actually get their diploma and GED, and then even less of those of those percentages of populations actually attend college. And there's definitely factors such as like geographic regions and societal norms that can contribute to those differences in percentages, right? And without addressing those, they don't even have the opportunity to access K-12 education, let alone college, and it's difficult because the job market especially is requiring, they're going from requiring a high school diploma. Lots of jobs are going from requiring a high school diploma to requiring a college degree, which is certainly not fair with how the statistics are showing in K-12 education,
Yeah. I think that for college-wise, it's like we forget that being accepted itself is a privilege in itself. You know, like people forget that. What is it? Being accepted into the college, it's a privilege to be accepted to that college because a lot of people can't get in. There's a lot of people who don't get that opportunity to even get into that college that you're at, and so you gotta be like, what is it? You gotta be aware of your surroundings, of the people that you're talking with, because I think I had somebody who got accepted into a school, and then they kind of put on their story or whatever on like social media that they were like, oh, I got into this school. Too bad I'm not even going to that school. And it's like, whoa there, because like it's a privilege to get into that school, but now you're bashing out on other people who didn't even get in, because acceptance rates to colleges is rather low to like big universities in itself, you know.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond whether or not you get like an exception letter.
Mm-hmm.
Acceptance. Brain is working. But because there's a lot of things that lead up to it. There's support from family.
Mm-hmm.
There's whether or not you have the resources to do the extracurriculars that a lot of colleges like to see. Whether or not you have financial aid for it. Whether or not you receive the grades in high school, and with that, it's also the same thing. Having support from family, having support from your peers and teachers, mental health. There's just a lot that lead up to that as well, that goes beyond whether or not you receive an acceptance letter. You really have to think like, why you got that acceptance letter. I personally did a lot of extracurriculars in high school. I had the support from family that I didn't have to work as much in high school, so I was able to focus on school. And I was fortunate enough to have my mom and sometimes my dad as well to drive me to and from soccer practice twice a week, and to soccer games on weekends, and from band and meeting people and everything. Not everyone gets that. And so like we often need to go deeper than just I got an acceptance letter. Like, well, why did you get that acceptance letter?
And I kind of want to transition to, because I think this kind of connects to a privilege that we also share, is being part of the upper middle class. I know that we all did various types of extracurriculars and different programs, but they, essentially did cost a lot of money. I know that if you want to be part of a club or even like a music program, you had to have an ASB card, right?
Yeah.
I know we all participate in sports, so ASB card was like also part of a thing. I know being in orchestra, we had to have a certain uniform and a certain
band attire, orchestra attire, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and also like certain attire that you would wear for volunteer programs or any other programs that you might be doing. It's just, it might not be in someone's, like
financial stance.
Like, yeah, to afford that, so they can't take those opportunities, unfortunately, to help build themselves and build their resume for college,
Yeah, and also, like, location has a lot to do with it, too, because I come from, like, suburbia, where I'm not worried about stepping out of my house, or walking across the street, or down the street, or up to the library. I have a 5-minute drive to the grocery store, to any food around me. I have the access to transportation. So, like, that, in itself is very privileged, and more people should be able to have access to that.
Yeah. I definitely kind of like relate to Jasmine, as obviously I live in an area that's rather diverse, but the neighborhood in which I live in is rather white, so it's more like, I guess, upper end, I guess, And so, like Jasmine, I don't really feel the the fear of going outside too much. And so, and like, for other people, they don't have that same feeling, you know. They can be living in a place that's very dangerous or very scary because it's not as safe as the areas that we live in, you know. Yeah.
I think also with those kind of fears and dangers that people may encounter in those sort of neighborhoods, it also essentially builds a culture around that neighborhood, and you might feel pressure to like participate in that culture, depending on those social norms, you know, just to be able to fit in with that neighborhood.
For sure.
Essentially, I also wanted to mention that we all have very supportive parents. We all still live in our parents' house. I still live in my parents' house, and you also live in your parents' house. Jasmine, you're kind of like in between your parents' house and your apartment, right?
Going back
I
and
have the
forth, yeah.
privilege of being able to go to the apartment for college this year, even though I don't really need to be on campus.
Yeah, I just feel like we all have really supportive parents, and they're also still together. There's also that privilege of our parents still being together and not separated. Personally, my parents, growing up, they would line up their night shifts, their shift schedules to make sure that at least someone was home to take care of my brother and I, which is really privileged because, you know, not a lot of people can have flexible job hours like that. And even if they didn't have flexible job hours at times, we would still have support from other family members, like our grandparents or great aunts and uncles, grand aunts and uncles. And also, I'm also very lucky to have my parents support me into going to a private university, which is fairly expensive, you know, to study nursing. Yeah, how about you guys?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it. Like, I am so grateful that while my parents had pretty busy work schedules, they still, despite that, they did still have the time to drive me to and from. And, you know, I did not play soccer very nearby. My practice was a half an hour away. So, like, driving half an hour there, half an hour back twice a week, and then for games, half an hour minimum. That takes a lot of time. And also, like, my dad works a 9 to 5, so he has a more structured schedule, and he's there at nights and cooks dinner and stuff. And my mom has a flexible work schedule where she can move around her appointments and stuff to take me places and take my older sibling places. But yeah, and like also like they were there for me when I have to fill out FAFSA or my scholarships if I ever need them, or my college applications, and like, hey mom, what is so and so and whatever, right? So they also like didn't put too much pressure on me for school. They let me do my thing, just making sure that I was doing well to the best of my abilities. They supported me. They got me a tutor when I needed one. And they let me pursue. They don't really pressure me to pursue any specific career path, which is very nice. I know that like that's not normal, or not normal, but like that's not always the case for college students, and especially like Asian American students, or like students from immigrant households. So yeah.
Yeah, I think touching on that kind of aspect of like being able to talk with your parents, like on a, I want to say rather comfortable level, you know, like you can casually talk to them. And so I know like I talked to a few friends the other day, and it's not the same case for everyone. You know, like for me, I have a relationship with my parents where I can bring up kind of stuff around my own life and then kind of talk to them about their own life and just be able to converse with them pretty naturally. But I know there's a lot of people who don't have that privilege and access or what is it, relationship with their parents in order to have that kind of conversation, you know. And it's like being able to talk to them, I can kind of connect with them in a more like, I guess, personal level, and I can actually like talk about things regarding my own life. But I know a lot of people can't really do that and kind of seek outlets in order to find that that support, you know. So yeah.
So now that we've talked a bit about our similarities, obviously that is not all of the similar privileges that we have. We discussed a good chunk of it. But for now, we're going to move on to our differences. And I'll start by saying that I am a cisgender heterosexual woman as of this time. But I definitely do have a lot of privileges surrounding being heterosexual or identifying as heterosexual as of this moment. I know that I've learned that the LGBTQ community will face unfair wages, straight up. Unfair wages, experience lower salary offers, and can be heavily discriminated in work just for identifying as part of that community, which is something I've never experienced as a heterosexual woman. I've never been shamed for my sexuality, and I've never, been reaped of resources being part of the LGBTQ community. Yeah, how about you guys? What are your gender and sexuality identities, and how does that impact you?
Well, I'm a cis woman, so like there are benefits of being as identifying as a gender I was born as. It's body explained too. Sorry, words are failing me. But basically, like, there are privileges to that. I've never had to worry about saying my pronouns in class, and I've never had any animosity about identifying as a woman. But like, obviously, just being a woman is rough sometimes, and we had also talked about this on the Asian American episode about like being sexualized and fetishized for being an Asian woman. Got a lot of comments that are like, oh, does he like you because you're Asian? Or you're lucky? Like, always having to question things sometimes, and like there's a lot of downfalls to that, and like often being talked over in class, whether it's because I'm a woman or because I'm perceived as shy, like similar to me, which I think, and you know me, I'm not always shy, at least not anymore, and just being perceived as such, because I have manners, and I let people talk, but then people talk over me, so just like the little things, little microaggressions.
Yeah, just to add a quick comment, that's definitely an issue. Like, one big issue is being ignorant about your privileges, but another big issue is people assuming your privileges. Like, you're basically assuming that I'm not capable of understanding what privileges I may or may not have, and trying to define me, which is really rude, and that's kind of also how stereotypes can be bigger and deeper.
And also, like, I've always, like, pursued, like, heterosexual relationships, but so, I have never really been worried about, like, at that time, what it's going to be like when I walk down the street holding hands with my partner, you know, and I never really have to worry with those relationships about what my parents will think, what my family will think, what my religious community will think, and just, or what my friends will think. So I'm fortunate in that way, that with those relationships I've never really had to worry about.
Yeah, I think for us, like, being born in the 2000s, right, we're kind of put in this kind of, I want to say awkward, but like, it's in this situation or this time period where everyone is becoming very aware of their own, like, what is it? I want to say sexuality. Let's say that, right? Like, this is the time where it's like really, it's gotten really big, and now we have to be more aware of our surroundings with other people, you know. So, like, when I was growing up, I never really thought about that kind of aspect of my life of being. For myself, I am a cis heterosexual man, right? I didn't really had to think about that because I guess for me that was quote unquote the norm, and then as we're going up into what is it? Because it was rather recent where the whole same-sex marriage trial came about. It was like, I think, was it early 2010s? Early 2010s, right? That's where it's really got big, and then it's been growing ever since. And so now we really need to be aware of our own privileges and our own sexuality, so that we can sympathize with others, you know.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's not like, it's also not necessarily that, like, it's a new topic.
Yeah.
Because it is definitely.
It just didn't grow to this scale until recently, yes.
Well, that's debatable because it has been pretty big for a very long time. It just hasn't. It's taken a long time for it to be accepted.
True.
And you also have to think of outside factors, especially what I've learned in the older adult population. There are 3 distinct generations within the older adult population in terms of the LGBTQ community. There is the generation during the World Wars, where literally that was the most big concern, was losing lives. So that topic was just not, it would just happen to not be touched upon. And it started to grow, but there were, in the next few decades, but there were studies that were coming out to try to prove that identifying as part of that community was considered a mental health disorder. So there were definitely barriers with people trying to communicate about their sexuality, especially if those types of studies are being made and conducted and results are being pushed out, although they are entirely incorrect. And it wasn't until, I would say, maybe the 1950s, 60s, where people were protesting, but it was highly discouraged by the use of violence, and whether that be physical and verbal. But definitely, due to the circumstances of the 2000s, where protesting was, the restrictions lifted up a little bit during that time, I guess you could say that the voices were louder or more prevalent. But yeah, those are kind of like the general circumstances that were going on in that time.
Okay. But then, yeah, I want to rephrase what I kind of said earlier. Then basically, it depends on the time period. I think now is a really good time period for this topic to be arisen, and therefore, it's gotten so much more attention, I guess. Right? Yeah.
So, thank you for all of that. That was a really interesting conversation. and it is nice to be able to talk about it. But like, it's not enough to just recognize it and talk about it, because we could talk about it all day and it's not going to mean anything if we don't do anything about it, you know? So, I kind of want to also talk about like how we all intend to address our privileges and also like uplift those to receive the same access and resources that we do.
I think for me, when I when I go around and see others, I try to kind of put myself in other people's shoes, right? Before I kind of act upon stuff, you want to look at your situation, but also their situation, because you don't want to belittle their situation and then kind of assume things, you know. And then also for what we're doing right now, it's like we're talking to each other about it. We're talking to each other about it, and we're also kind of bringing awareness to others, and that's why it's a good way to address our own privileges and then address how other people have their own privileges, I guess, you know. And then I think for me, the one thing that is really big for me is acknowledging my own privileges and then understanding other person's situations. Because the biggest thing for me is I have my own life that I'm living, but I will never experience another person's situation, you know. And therefore, I need to show like sympathy and try to understand their own situation so that I don't offend or belittle them.
Yeah, definitely adding on to that, especially mindfulness, awareness, and acknowledging your own privilege, and also, you know, acknowledging that you will frankly have advantages over certain community groups. So being aware of yourself and of those around you. And I also wanted to build on by addressing microaggressions, which can build up based on like topics of how we associate with people in our society, and also how we perceive each other. I'm going to give a quick definition by D.W. Sue of what microaggressions are. They are everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. And microaggressions can especially fall under when addressing each other's privileges, right? So, again, having a sense of awareness around you can minimize these microaggressions, or if they happen, to address them and to use your privilege when maybe others cannot, to build on equal opportunities, to fight those microaggressions and to fight the power imbalances that can come.
Yeah, like going off of what you said, like again, like being open-minded and understanding of all circumstances, and like recognizing these little microaggressions and how they can build up and how they are so integrated into our daily interactions and vocabulary and attitudes and perceptions of people. And I think I just really want to be able to, not just want to, because I need to, be able to put myself out there, offer my own resources to help those who may ask, and like obviously like recognize my own privilege, but like it's very base level, and just like putting myself out there to really help people, connect with people, and ensure that we are working towards getting them that access, and really like doing it for the sake of helping and for them, and not from some kind of savior complex. So yeah, so, thanks for that discussion. It was a good one. We're a little low energy today, that it was really interesting being able to talk to you about it. And like again, like everyone, we do not. This is not the most diverse set of people at the moment, and so please take everything that we've said with a grain of salt. We have not necessarily a narrow mindset between all of us, but we have a pretty I don't know, again, like not diverse. So sorry.
It's pretty similar, so it's not
Yeah.
too like, yeah.
Yeah. Something that helps us get along is that we're all similar. So that's what brought us all together. Yeah, it was a very important discussion to have. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for listening to us talk about our privileges. We hope this helped give some insight of who we are and maybe inspire some thinking or conversations of your own and those around you. If there was anything we missed, please let us know in the comment section down below if you're watching us on YouTube, or on Instagram if you're listening to us on Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to be notified when we upload a new podcast episode. Once we reach 50 subscribers, for 50 subscriber special, we're going to host a YouTube live answering questions and prompts based on what you guys suggest on all our platforms.
Yeah, so our podcast is available on Spotify and YouTube under our name. You can follow us on Instagram at PastTheNickMom to connect with us and receive updates on our podcast. So yeah, we'll see you guys in a bit. Bye. Hey guys, it's Zui here, and I'm here to give you guys the charity of the week. And so today we're featuring a non-profit organization that works internationally to provide healthcare services to those who do not have the privilege otherwise. Their name is the Health Equity International, and they help to provide neonatal exams, surgeries, and general patient visits. Their website is transparent with specific impacts such as their COVID-19 response and work towards the Haiti earthquake disaster. We hope you consider donating to them, and as always, the link will be in the description below. See you guys soon.